There's a whole world out there that every so often rewards ambition.
Black Sails is a show with a lot of hidden history that not many people know or care about. But I do, so I'm going to talk about it. But first, an intro. Black Sails aired from 2014 to 2017 on Starz, and was the brainchild of Rob Levin, John Steinberg, and Robert Louis Stevenson. If that last name rings any bells, it should. Robert Louis Stevenson's the author of Treasure Island, a seminal piece of piratical literature that was first published in 1882 in serialized format, to which Black Sails is a prequel. Now I know prequels and sequels are everywhere these days, but this one has the benefit of being good. So, what is it all about? Pirates, obviously, but more to the point, the fall of Captain Flint and the rise of Long John Silver.
Sorry.
Which is perfect because while everybody has heard of Long John, not many people know or remember Flint from the book. Probably because he's already dead in it, but his death is pivotal because it sets in motion the events of Treasure Island. That being, it's Flint's money they're hunting in the book. So the question of who's Flint is already an intriguing one, but tie him to the rise of one of the most iconic figures in all of literature, and there's an origin story worth telling, especially when combined with the real-life adventures of some of history's greatest pirates like Anne Bonny, Jack Rackham, Charles Vane, Benjamin Hornigold, and Edward Teach, all of who are fighting for control over Nassau. So where exactly is it? Well, Nassau is the capital of New Providence Island, which is this tiny spit of land in the Bahamas that was, at the time, surrounded by Spanish territory. Nassau used to belong to England, but in 1696, Henry Avery bribed the governor to turn a blind eye to his piracy, opening a door for others to do the same, until 1703 when the Rosario raid started. Referenced several times in the show, the raids on Nassau were instigated by Spanish and French armies in an effort to combat English piracy of merchant vessels, only it had the opposite effect. Instead of tempering crime, the raids repelled colonists, allowing the pirates to claim the island for their own. Claim it, but not keep it, which is where Captain Flint comes in. Born James McGraw, Flint started his career in the Navy as a young lieutenant. Viewed as an up-and-coming star in the Admiralty, McGraw was assigned the position of attaché to a young politician by the name of Thomas Hamilton. Hamilton needed the help of an experienced naval officer to lend credibility to his progressive plan for resettling Nassau, one in which the pirates would be offered pardons for their crimes in exchange for the unhindered return of commerce. Something the conservative men of Whitehall wanted to reject, but with a Navy backing it, the plan seemed feasible, and everything was going fine until personal affairs were revealed, scandals ensued, and a lover was lost. Furious, McGraw fled to New Providence where he changed his name to Flint and rose to become the most notorious pirate in the Bahamas. He accomplished this by being very good at his job and slaughtering a bunch of folk. Unfortunately, his reserved manner and brutal methods also made him one of the most hated pirate captains, a situation he then exacerbated by taking his men on a months-long hunt with little to no immediate payout. So, what was he hunting?
Arca de Lima.
Information, specifically the scheduled route of a Spanish treasure galleon called La Urca de Lima. Now, historically, the ship's cargo was only worth about 87,000 pounds, which may not sound like a lot in today's market, but translates into 18 million, or 24 USD. So when the show says 5 million in 1715, that amount would have been worth over 1 billion today. Which explains why Flint kept it such a secret, even from his crew. So while he knows their efforts will be worth it, all his men see is toil without wages, causing a majority of them to lose confidence in his ability to captain. And unlike the Navy, captains on pirate vessels were elected positions. His job and his life depend on him getting that information. So when his new crewist member steals the info and tries to sell it to a rival captain, you can see why this would make Flint a bit irritable. So who would dare do something so brazen?
My name is John Silver, and I happen to be a very good cook.
But before Silver's transaction can go through, Flint finds out and starts hunting him down. Desperate to extend his life, Silver memorizes the information and burns it, making him the only man who knows when and where the treasure galleon is going to stop to resupply. As for the rival captain, Vane, well, he loses his money, crew, and good standing with the local fence, a young, beautiful, educated woman by the name of Eleanor Guthrie, whose father runs the black market. A vacation Eleanor helps to oversee until she eventually takes over. But because she's a woman lording over a bunch of men, a lot of people want to see her fall. Chief among them being her ex-lovers, Max and Charles. Max is a French whore who over the course of the series turns into a brothel madam. With a vast network of spies and an influx of money, Max is able to purchase controlling interests in other businesses on the island, giving her what amounts to a cartel by the end of the show, whereas Charles Vane is the most feared pirate captain on Nassau, second only to Flint. And while he genuinely loves and admires Eleanor, their ambitions conflict to such a degree that they eventually become enemies.
You will turn on absolutely anyone, won't you?
Yet neither of these two take down Eleanor harder or faster than Benjamin Hornigold, a pirate-turned-pirate hunter when he's ousted from Nassau's fort by Charles Vane, and then abandoned by Flint and Eleanor shortly afterwards. Angry, Hornigold has Eleanor arrested, where she's sent to England to face trial. Only, she doesn't. Instead, she's forgiven and invited back to the Bahamas by Nassau's newly appointed governor, Woodes Rogers. With her assistance, Rogers intends to bring an end to piracy in the New World, putting him in direct opposition with Captain Flint, a man whose only ambition for seeking the Urca gold was to prevent or combat this very outcome. So, does he get it? Well, yes and no. The gold switches hands a lot in the show, but by the third season, it's mostly been reclaimed by Woodes Rogers, who has taken over Nassau without firing a single shot. How? He gave the pirates royal pardons, and if you think this is a lame idea, let me just say it worked. Woodes Rogers is a historical figure who really did do this to great effect. By issuing clemency to the pirates, many of them grabbed at the opportunity to become law-abiding citizens again, while others found gainful employment in pirate hunting. Fewer still remained pirates, but among their ranks was Charles Vane, who, in point of fact, really did light a ship on fire and ram it at Rogers' fleet. So take that, Game of Thrones. Who's the ripoff now? Probably Shira. Anyway, the show follows Rogers' journey into the Bahamas fairly well, from the tropical diseases to the pirate insurgency, even a Spanish attack, but with a significant twist on the last one there. More on that later. Point is, Rogers on the show reclaimed Nassau and is now in possession of all that pilfered gold. So, what does he do with it? He gives it back to Spain because they invested in his venture for this very reason. If he doesn't, then it's like a breach of contract, where Spain can attack Nassau without worrying about retribution from England because business is business, and they agree to it. Either way, it's a win-win for Spain, but a time-sensitive mission for Rogers. A bad situation made worse when it's discovered that a sizable portion of the gold was converted into a cache of gems, thus making it easier to hide and transport. When Rogers is made aware of the treasure's existence, he briefly contemplates keeping it, but he doesn't know that Spain knows. So when Spain's spy tells him they know he knows, he's like, oh no, because he knows with an inoperable fort and a limited set of soldiers, the odds of him surviving such a force are slim to none. So he tries talking to Flint, who is unmoved by his plight because England ruined his life. Doesn't matter that this was once his plan, he just really wants to be rid of England no matter the cost, which shouldn't be a problem if he's got the money and manpower to rebuild it. Operative word there being, if. And that's a sizable one too, because anybody who would have fought with Flint signed their name to a royal pardon. So where does his army come from? Or rather, the writer's inspiration for it does. Stick with me now. Hornigold mirrors history by working with Rogers and hunting down his former compatriots when he lures Flint into a trap. Pressed between him and a hurricane, Hornigold tells Flint accept the pardon or die, and Flint, being a rational man of sound mind and judgment, chooses the hurricane and miraculously lives, where, interestingly enough, the real Hornigold did not. In 1719, he died in a hurricane, but this isn't the first or last time that Flint usurps others' historical thunder for his own. But the hurricane is largely symbolic of his grief, while his hallucinations are emblematic of his desire to die. Anyway, other stuff happens, and eventually Flint ends up on an island where he and his men are taken prisoner by a village of Maroons, aka escaped slaves. Locked in a cage with no way out, Flint resigns himself to death. Nobody else seems to mind or care except Silver, who uses that tongue of his to remind Flint of who he is, the man who talked him into caring about the crew. Which is a bit of a lie when you stop and look at the second season. I mean, Silver only started to care about the men when he saw their loyalty aimed at him. Either way, it works, and this is where we get the first glimmer of Jamaican history on the show in the form of the Queen. She has no name other than her title, but it's obvious from the way that Ben Gunn describes her that she's a stand-in for Queen Nanny, Jamaica's only female national hero.
She is everything here. Priestess, governess, warlord.
Something she earned by being a brilliant tactician to the Windwards in the First Maroon War. Now, if you've already seen the show, then you know she doesn't do anything nearly as cool as her historical counterpart. However, most of what I could find about Queen Annie was very folkloric in nature, so it's my belief, read I have no proof, that the writers wanted to give this esteem to a minor character from the book. So minor, in fact, that she had no name, just a descriptor as Long John's negress wife. Fans, of course, know I'm talking about Maddie, the Queen's daughter, who is being groomed to take over her mother's role on the island. So when the Queen enters into an alliance with the pirates, she wants to send someone she trusts to speak on her behalf, someone who can command the same authority and exercise similar judgment in her place, and who better to do that than the heir apparent? But before they can get underway, they need more like-minded pirates than just Flint and his one ship. That's where Charles Vane comes in, and together they sail back to Nassau to marshal whatever resources they can to fight this war, be it with recruits, shot, or a cache of gems. They mostly go back for the gems. So who has them? Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham, only Jack got himself arrested trying to get a pardon, and Bonny is using its entirety to pay for his release. When Rogers doesn't surrender Jack, Anne joins forces with Flint and Charles, where together they rescue Jack, steal back the treasure, and deliver one hell of a blow to Rogers. Unfortunately, Vane is captured in the effort, and since the governor is laid up with a tropical disease, Eleanor is the one who passes judgment on him. What she couldn't have known, however, was that Vane recently made up with his pirate father figure, Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard, who is more than a little angry to discover his surrogate son was killed by the same woman who ousted him from Nassau years ago. So between Blackbeard's armada, Flint's tactical brilliance, and the Maroons' lay of their land knowledge, Roger's forces are beaten back, but only temporarily as the next volley belongs to him. With Max's help, the governor is able to disrupt the pirate spy network just long enough for him to deliver a catastrophic defeat to them. With Blackbeard on sea and Flint on shore, the governor turns his immediate attention to Blackbeard, who taunts him. The governor tries to leave Nassau to seek aid from the colonies, but is pursued by Teach. He eventually catches up, they fight, and it ends in one of the most gruesome deaths I've ever seen on television. Luckily, Flint and Silver have more success, thanks and not to Billy Bones, a character that neither likes nor trusts Flint, probably because Flint has done some pretty unlikable and untrustworthy things, such as murdering his father figure and almost killing Billy a few times. So, when Bones elects to stay behind on Nassau in the third season, it's with the dual intent of agitating the governor's plans and uniting their causes around one person, who's not Flint. How does he do this? By issuing the black spot to their enemies and killing them in the name of Long John Silver. But tricky thing about personality cults is they only tend to work until you take the person away. So when Silver dies in the governor's trap, it creates a power vacuum that both Flint and Bones elect to fill. Problem is that Billy has the army while Flint has the money. To help balance the situation is Maddie, the official wife of Long John Silver. Maddie is able to play referee between the two men really well until she discovers Billy's plan comes with great personal risk to other slaves on the island. Billy becomes so upset when she sides with Flint that he opens fire on them both and continues with his plans anyway. For his arrogance, hundreds of slaves are beaten, giving rise to a massive slave revolt led by a man named Julius who views pirates in the same light as the plantation owners. Not great. Especially since Silver's not dead, and when he hears about Billy's actions against his wife, friend, and their alliance, he's understandably not happy. However, Billy does come through at the last minute to help retake Nassau. With the governor gone dealing with Blackbeard, Eleanor is driven into the fort where she's had enough. In a secret meeting with Flint and Silver, she negotiates to surrender the fort in exchange for the cache of gems. Why? Because Rogers is heavily in debt, and as his new wife, she wants to help him get out from under. Her plan is to take the gems with her husband and leave Nassau for Spain to deal with. Sadly, when Rogers returns home to find his wife attacking him, he leaves to do as stupid. He sails to Cuba and begs the governor to burn Nassau to the ground, provided they leave the fort alone. Now, historically, something like this did occur. Spain really did attack New Providence during Rogers' tenure, but only because the two empires were yet again at war. So while historical Rogers defended the inhabitants, the show uses it to break him psychologically by having him be responsible for the death of his wife. Now, Eleanor may not have been the best villain on the show, but she was its greatest antagonist. Difference being the connotation of evil. A villain has one where an antagonist? Not necessarily. Eleanor's relationship with the pirates is more adversarial than it is sadistic. True, she went after Vane to avenge her father, but her actions before and after weren't needlessly cruel. Rather, they were brutally efficient. So while Rogers may have supplied the resources, Eleanor knew how to command them, making her death not only an emotional blow for the man, but a tactical one as well, the result of which makes the governor exceedingly dangerous because he has little left to live for save Nassau. Lucky for him, he has a hostage, Maddie, who he tries to ransom for the treasure. It doesn't work, largely due to Flint. Yeah. Flint is willing to trade the fortune for military purposes but not sentimental, something Silver is rightfully mad about, but he agrees to attempt a rescue mission anyway. But just in case, he smuggles the booty on board, and it's a good thing too because Rogers is waiting for them. He points a pistol at Maddie and demands to see the goods. Satisfied when Silver complies, he brings them to Skeleton Island to complete the transaction. Once there, Flint steals the treasure, buries it, and demands Silver listen to him. Meanwhile, an impatient Rogers burns their ship, kills half their crew, and is just about to deliver the coup de grace when Rackham shows up. Jack rescues Flint and Silver, who put aside their differences, and together the three of them take Rogers down. Once it's done, Silver rescues Maddie and accompanies Flint to retrieve the treasure. But it never happens. Having a taste of war and all the loss of life it entails, Silver taps out. He tells Flint that having a glimpse of the loss he's suffered, he understands the rage and desire to make it mean something, but he just wants to live his life in peace with Maddie. In return, Flint warns him.
Even if you can persuade her to keep you, she'll no longer be enough, and the comfort will grow stale.
And afterwards, one of two things happens. Either Flint dies or he doesn't. It's one of those pick and choose endings, but if you're like me and hate that, then know that the writers said the official ending is Flint lives, which is stupid, and here's why. It involves Flint voluntarily becoming a slave, after having instigated a war against slavery. True, he's with Thomas, but they're still slaves. And because I'm a very crass person, my immediate questions were, can they bone, will they bone, how will they bone? And given what we know about Thomas and have seen of Flint, what made the writers think Thomas was just going to accept Flint after everything he's done? Like, the man murdered his father. Not to mention a whole other crop of innocent folk, making him a bit of a mass murderer. Now don't get me wrong, I love the character Flint. He's my absolute favorite, but my god is he bad boyfriend material. Just the worst. Besides, to give all these characters their happily ever after ending seems pretty disingenuous to the tone of the show thus far. I mean, we see a woman getting gang raped, but killing the main character crosses the line because... what? He dies in Georgia 30 years later? He hasn't drawn a map for Jim Hawkins to discover yet? Seriously, what is the reasoning here? They've already diverged from the book by stranding Billy on Skeleton Island a la Ben Gunn, so why couldn't they just show Billy finding the treasure and drawing the map himself? Why does Flint need to live?
Flint had allies who would have only been emboldened by his death.
The martyr argument Jack gives doesn't make any sense because Flint wasn't that well liked, so why give him this ending? And the only reason I can think of is the writers wanted to avoid the bury your gays trope, which makes sense because in 2016 there was a lot of controversy surrounding the deaths of queer characters in television to advance the plot of straight ones. Fans of the TV show The 100 were particularly influential when they created the hashtag Lexapledge and got several showrunners to take it via social media. Now, I'm not saying this is what happened on Black Sails, but it is possible that the writers took heed, especially considering Flint's death would save Silver's relationship. And I can definitely see why they wouldn't want to play into that. However, it also seems just as toxic to end the story here because not only did Flint betray everything Thomas was trying to accomplish in Parliament, but he did so with a tremendous amount of violence. At least with the Maroon Queen, he was fighting for something, the end to an evil, unjust, cruel system that during its tenure murdered over 60 million men, women, and children. But then to abandon that cause to join into that very institution? What kind of a mixed message is that? Ah, but Monarch, they can always escape. Yeah, he could, but they don't show that on the show, do they? And according to Treasure Island, Flint dies in Georgia. And guess where that plantation is?
An estate in the wilderness, north of Spanish Florida.
So... yeah. It's allusions like these that make me lean towards the Kill Him Dead version. Not only would it be a clear break from the book, but it would show that at least one other person besides Maddie doesn't get their happily ever after, thus keeping with the realistic tone. Sure, Rogers goes to prison for debt, but if you look at the book Eleanor's chambermaid is reading here, you'll see it's a general history of the pirates. And for those of you that don't know, that's the book that relaunched his career! Woodes Rogers was such a hero after its release that he was able to petition the king for financial redress, and he got it. He sailed back to the Bahamas, was reinstated as governor, where he died. In office, free. No such Easter egg was given to Maddie. Her happiness is contingent on forgiving a man who betrayed her, and seeing how close this storyline resembles Jamaican history, that it only gives her people about 60 years of peace before England starts being a dick again. It occurs to me now that I should probably substantiate that last sentence. Okay, so there were 2 Maroon Wars in Jamaica. The first one lasted from roughly 1673 to 1739, while the second from 1795 to 96. Black Sails takes a lot of its cues from the first one, particularly the tail end where the Maroons were divided into 2 camps, the Windwards and the Leewards. The Leewards were the larger of the two, but the Windwards were more militant. They were the ones who really wanted to see an end to slavery in Jamaica, and among their leaders was Queen Nanny, whereas the Leewards were led by a man named Cudjoe, who is represented in the show by Julius. Now, the British were so outnumbered by the slaves in Jamaica that they went to the Leewards with a deal: emancipation and a portion of land in exchange for any escaped slaves seeking asylum being turned over to British authorities. But where Maddie rejoins with epic fire,
why would we ever accept that?
Cudjoe signed the treaty, and by undermining and outnumbering their forces, the Windwards had no choice but to sign one of their own. Nevertheless, they lived in relative peace for 60 years until the Second Maroon War, which only lasted for a year but was still pretty bloody and really weird. Seriously, it involves a massive deportation to Canada. It's that bizarre. Anyway, it's for these reasons I'm not a fan of Maddie forgiving Silver. I think the ending would have been much stronger had Silver killed Flint, told Maddie the lie, she follows the same line of logic, and instead of asking him to leave, she casts him out. Doesn't matter if she wants to believe him, she can't. He betrayed her. However, she knows her enemies well enough that they won't keep their word for long. So if Silver wants back in her good graces, then he needs to ensure her people's security. And what better way to do that than with the cash? If Flint really is alive, then Silver should have no problems getting the location from him. If not, then Silver stays on that metaphorical couch of banishment. Desperate, Silver returns to the island to try and pick up the trail, but all he finds for his efforts is a starving Ben Gunn. Silver takes him aboard, interrogates him, and then sails off, proclaiming it a waste of time. But before it fades to black, the camera zooms in on a nervous-looking Ben Gunn as we see clutched in his hands is a crudely drawn map. Boom, done, that's a wrap. Silver now has an actual reason to pursue the treasure. Billy gets to stay marooned on Skeleton Island, while Ben Gunn sails away with a fortune in his pocket, at least until Silver hunts him down, thus leading into the book with only a minor role reversal. But this is just fan fiction. The real ending has none of the setup for the book, which in my opinion makes it severely flawed. But endings are hard. This one especially, since its central conflict is a war against England that was instigated by a bisexual man's rage, but being fought for and over by slaves. History tells us their plight ended in compromise, and the writer stayed true to that. So the question then becomes how to quell Flint without making him another statistic in the bury your gays trope, or compromising the tone of the show. And the short answer is, you can't. Trying like they did only resulted in an emotional deus ex machina a la Thomas Being Alive, a contrivance so idealistic it clashes with the realism, read tone, of the show. So to address said clash, the writers present the idealism as a part of an ambiguous ending where the audience gets to pick its bliss. In other words, a cop-out. A brilliantly presented one, but an avoidance nonetheless. Still, I get it. I ran the numbers behind the queer versus straight character mortality rates on the show, and if they wanted to be viewed as a net positive for the LGBTQIA+ community, either Flint or Thomas had to live. But to avoid the other half of that trope where the corrupting partner dies, then they had to make it appear like both lived, even though the consequence of this is effectively rewarding homicidal behavior with queer slavery. Again, depending on how you look at it. It's a very sort of Damocles scenario the writers painted themselves into and solved with ambiguity, which lacks the artistic satisfaction of a definite conclusion. But hey, both sides are presented well, from the turn of the head suggesting a shot has been fired, to the slight filter over the plantation alluding to the Elysian Fields tying into the River of Styx from previous episodes, along with the massive setup beforehand hinting at the possibility of Thomas being alive. Then there's Jack's voiceover drawing the audience's attention to the fact that it's deliberate without being too obvious.
A story is true, a story is untrue. As time extends, it matters less and less.
Honestly, it's masterful, and I truly admire the style in which it was delivered. To make a gamble like this while simultaneously tying up other loose ends like the Maroon War, Nassau's Future, and Mary Read, it's ballsy, and it works to the degree that each viewer allows it to, which in my case is not at all.
You could be more welcoming to new people.
But please, don't allow my opinions on this to influence your own. The only reason I'm so hard on it is because I love everything else. It may not sound like it, but I assure you, I do. Black Sails is a wonderful marriage between literary fiction and historical fact, striking a perfect balance for unique storytelling, which is a massive credit to the writers, who, if rumors are true, only got about 2 weeks off from the show during its entire run. That's almost 4 years of non-stop work, which is impressive given the quality of the storytelling and the nature of the dialogue. True, a lot of the characters sound a bit similar, but it happens on shows, especially period pieces where certain levels of vocabulary are expected, and only degrees of performance separate them.
Everyone is a monster to someone. Since you are so convinced that I am yours, I will be it.
But if you insist upon making me your villain, I'll play the part.
Still, you could almost make this into a radio drama. The dialogue works so well, but when integrated with the actors, their body language, costumes, props, sets, stunts, music, all of it working together, it really does elevate it into art. Honestly, I was surprised when Toby Stephens didn't win any awards for his portrayal as Flint, but that speaks to Hollywood's failing more than it does his. So I know I skipped past a ton of subplots, themes, and hidden messages, but honestly, if I continue, I'll never shut up. This show was seriously underappreciated. So, if you like socioeconomic political dramas, LGBT representation, pirates, and a good amount of action and sex, then I beg you to push past the first season and dive into Black Sails. It's worth a watch.
That kid must really want to get laid.